In this video, I'm going to break down the AQA GCSE Geography pre-release booklet for 2020. So in this video, I'm going to break down the AQA GCSE Geography pre-release booklet from 2020. Now this was not actually used for the summer exams, and there's a number of reasons why I'm going to be producing this video. So this is the 2020 pre-release booklet that the schools got in March. Again, we couldn't use it for any exams, so it wasn't used for the summer exam period at all. It will, however, be used for anyone sitting the November series, so that's the 20th of November. So if anyone is going to be taking GCSE Geography exams in November this year of 2020, you'll be using this pre-release booklet. So it's really important that you understand the booklet, you understand all the information in it, and then you can apply that to all the questions they're going to pose to you. It's also really useful for anyone that's going to be taking any kind of mock exams or doing any work on this in preparation for the 2021 exams. So I know a lot of schools, a lot of staff are going to be using this pre-release booklet in a way to prepare people for next summer's exams. So again, you can go through the process of understanding the booklet, understanding what type of questions might come up for this exam paper as well. Now, I've also included my own mock exam paper. The link is going to be in the description below. And I'm also going to include the mark scheme, which is going to be available on the TES website. So again, check out that link. I know a lot of staff will probably use it and make their lives easier. But again, if you're revising and want to, prepare a lot more thoroughly, then this would be a good exercise. Again, I'm going to also include some separate videos just with practice questions on there as well. Okay, so lots of different resources for this pre-release booklet. Let's look at why we need to look at this thing. Okay, when we go into this pre-release booklet, you're going to have all the information in front of you in the exam. So it's kind of like an open book test that you can refer back to this information. So the main thing is you need to know where all the key points are and what they are. If you understand that before going into the exam, it's going to make it a lot easier. Make sure you understand any of the data or the graphs. So, make sure you understand the units, what it's actually telling you, what the trends and patterns are. Again, this will save a lot of time when you're sat in the exam because you already know the answers. Just having a knowledge of where the information is, again, will speed things up. If you read through it several times before the exam, you won't need to keep searching through the information. You should have an idea where to look. There may be some kind of opinions. A lot of the pre-release papers we've seen the last few years, the last couple of questions have always asked for like an opinion. Do you agree or disagree? So again, you might be able to discuss that in your class with your teachers before you actually go into the exam. And again, all of this is going to save time in the exam. So the more you prepare, the more you understand what is required for that exam, the faster you're going to be, the more efficient you're going to be in the exam. So let's take a look at Figure 1, okay, which is an increasingly urban world. And again, this first figure usually just gives us an overview of the main topic areas you're going to be seeing in the pre-release booklet. So they want to try and introduce to the topic and give you the basic understanding. Okay, so the first section we see that they're giving you information about the world is becoming more and more urban, there's an increase in urban population since 1960. In 1990, 43% of the population has lived in urban areas, and they think that's going to be increasing. So the estimate is that it could be 60% by 2030 or 70% by 2050. Then we've got our first pieces of data that we can look at, and this shows the urban and rural populations from 1950 to 2050. So again, they've included some predictive data of how they see that trends going on through time. Again, when you're looking at data like this, make sure you understand what's going on. So make sure you understand the key. So in this graph, we've got urban population is the blue line and rural population is the red line. Again, something as important as that is people often overlook and make mistakes, so make sure you check out the key. Now, also you need to look at the units. So again, some of these things, they're not that obvious, but basically what they're showing is 1,000 million, which is a billion. So it goes up in billions along the left-hand side. And again, along the bottom is the years, and we've got that predicted data from 2030 to 2050. And again, we should be able to see the different trends going on. Now, if we look at the data, well, the urban population is increasing through time. Okay, from 1950, 1960, it rapidly increases, up to over 6 billion they predict for 2050. Now, rural population, again, increases slightly towards the year 2000, but then it starts to plateau, flattens, and then there's also a little bit of decline when we get to 2040 to 2050. Okay, so again, all this information just be really useful. The next section is the rates of urban growth. So they've given you a quote. You might want to refer back to that answering questions. Some of the main bits of information in there is that urban populations are not evenly spread out. They're condensed to certain cities and areas, and they're not just spread across all of the cities. And no region has seen a decrease. We've then got a piece of text which again goes into, there's a big increase in Asia and Africa. They provide lots of different data to prove this, but again, it's acknowledging that Asia and Africa are seeing a big increase in urban populations. And then we've got our second piece of data, the urban population percentage graph. Again, when we look at this, we want to see a trend, we want to see the pattern, and we want to talk about the largest increases. So I'd go through this data and make a note of which areas increase over time substantially. Are there any standout areas that go from a low percentage to a higher percentage? And just make a note of that. Again, we've already acknowledged that Africa and Asia have seen big increases, so you might want to pick up on that data as well. Moving on to the next section, which is still a Figure 1, we've got the economic development and urbanisation. When we're talking about economic development, we mean it equals a better quality of life, a better standard of life. We can see improved social and economic facilities. And they use the example of China. So from 1985 to 2010, the urban population doubled. And they've also highlighted that the top 10 cities equal 20% of the wealth of the country. When we look at the scatter graph, again, the trend we're seeing is that when the GDP increases, that's the gross domestic product, there is a higher percentage of population living in urban areas. That is the trend and pattern we're seeing there. The next section looks at the growth of cities. Now, it's important to define what we mean by these things. So we're saying a large city is 5 to 10 million and a mega city is over 10 million people. We've seen an increase in slums, but a decrease of rural communities. And we've seen a widening of the gap in living standards in these areas. So the last section of Figure 1 is global patterns of urbanisation from 2015. Again, you make sure you check out the key. There's lots of information, understand what the different colours mean, and so that you can equate the higher percentage of urban population to different areas. It might be worth looking up some of these countries, using your atlas, so you know which areas have a higher urban percentage of population. And again, there could be questions that requires reference to the map. So they might talk about certain areas. They might want you to refer to north, east, south and west, or continents of the world as well. So what possible questions could come up relating to Figure 1? So here's just a few examples. You could get some describe questions on any of the data that you see on these pages. They might get you to compare the data from one data set to another. They might want you to calculate some kind of value. So it might be really useful that you go over your general kind of maths principles that you're going to be using in geography as well. You might want to discuss the increase in urban population in specific locations. They might reference certain countries or continents and then want you to discuss what's happening in those areas. They might want to talk about the uneven spread across the world as well and have a 4 or 6 marker asking you to describe what's happening to those global patterns. But then the last question that might come up is explain the problems with urban population growth. And you might need to look back through the text to find what some of these issues are and reference them in your answer. Looking at Figure 2, this moves on to the growth of slums in LICs and NEEs. So we see the number of slum dwellers continuing to grow. So more people are living in shanty towns and slums. Again, We've had an increase, so in 1990, in slums, in LICs and NEE, there was 608 million people living there, but by 2015 they estimate it to be 881 million. So there's been a big increase in people moving to cities, wanting to be in the urban environment, but living in poor conditions of slums. And again, one of the main reasons for this is cities cannot keep up with the rate of urban growth. The more and more people, the growth of the population living there, cities cannot keep up. Can't keep up with infrastructure, providing education and healthcare. Again, it's an issue in lots of these countries. Then we've got the percentage of urban population living in slums from 1990 to 2014, and there's several pieces of data for this. So the overall trend is a lot of them are decreasing. There are less people living in the slums. But if you look at the data, are there any areas that have actually increased? So more people are living in the slums. Again, you just need to acknowledge that and make a note of which areas. Then we look at inequality in LICs and NEE cities. So what it signifies is African cities have the greatest gap between the rich and the poor. There is bigger inequality between these areas. Now, some of the major kind of problems with this identified in the information is they could be seen as lazy or criminal, and they could therefore receive unfair treatment. If there's an increase of wealth, it might rise prices in certain areas in the city. And there might be an inability for poor to take advantage of opportunities in the city, and there might be an overall lack of security in these areas. So the next section is urbanisation can be a force for good with better jobs and cheaper services. So the last page kind of showed that it was a negative thing, there were some issues, and this looks at the positives. So how can urbanisation be a good thing? Now we've identified that urbanisation will lead to better paid jobs and cheaper access to basic services. That's one of the benefits of urbanising areas. Rural water costing more than urban water. Okay, so it should be cheaper to access clean water when you're in the city compared to living in the countryside. And conditions in the poorest slums are a risk to human life. They talk about what some of the issues are and why it is still quite bad. So, it's building up a bit of a balance here of the good and the negative. We've got the percentage of access to piped water and improved sanitation. This highlights the differences between urban and rural services. So we've broken it down in here. You can see the percentage difference, the areas that are making those improvements, and the big gap between the rural and the urban. And again, you just want to, show the differences in those percentages. More than half of all urban dwellers in sub-Saharan Africa live in slums. So again, bold statement for this next section. It highlights Lagos. It talks about there's a large increase in population. There's lots of economic opportunities, so this is increased rural to urban migration. And it begs the questions of, can urban infrastructure keep up? They've mentioned it in some of the other bits of information, but again, will they be able to continue building, continue building homes, sanitation services, water services, education and healthcare services to keep up with the demands? There was also lots of issues with electricity and water supplies. We've got the percentage of urban population living in slums from 2014. The darker areas equal the higher percentage of population living in slums. So again, you might want to talk about the different countries and areas, and a lot of the cities have been identified on that map as well, so you might want to refer to that. And then we've got the last section, which is the Africa's fastest growing cities, and this highlights again where those major differences are, the major increase and the most populated cities. Possible questions for figure 2. You might want to look at what the key trends for the data. Lots of data on this figure. Again, are they increasing or decreasing? Which regions are seeing the biggest increase and decrease? So again, you want to reference back to the countries they're identified on tables or on maps in the figure. Be specific about these areas. Identify the problems with growing inequality. So again, they've given you several different problems. So make a note of it, go back and refer to those problems they've identified in the text. Evaluation of the advantages or disadvantages of rapid urbanisation. For a 6 marker, you really want to be looking at a balanced opinion. What are some of the positives? What are some of the negatives? And then there might be some specific questions on the African slums and what it's actually like living in those areas, what some of the problems are. Finishing with figure 3. Okay, so we've gone through this resource. It started off with the basic information about urban population. Then it looked specifically at slums and what the conditions were like in those areas, some of the problems. And now we're looking at the title of Slums of Hope or Slums of Despair. So it's really kind of framing this to be, do you think they're going to be a positive thing or a negative thing? So it starts off specifically looking at Lagos in Nigeria, and this kind of paints a picture of the poor living conditions they live in. They reckon 3/4 of the population live in the slums, and 50% of the population suffer from environmental diseases transmitted through air, water and food or by insects. There are some positives though. They identify the positives being there's a lot of business action going on in the area. There's lots of recycling businesses and there is a strong community spirit. The next section looks at Kibera in Nairobi, and again this is the largest slum in Africa. It's government ownership, so there's no rights for tenants. Poor living conditions, again they give you more evidence what it's like, but there are again lots of positives in this area. Lots of community projects, health and education projects. There's children feeding programs and microfinance projects for small businesses. So they really want to try and invest and have very kind of small loans for small businesses to help them get started. We've then got an extract from Bill Bryson's African Diary, and this really is a big negative section. Okay, so it describes the living conditions in a negative way and how bad it might be. Last section is Dharavi in Mumbai. And this again is kind of positive and negative. It's the largest slum in India. And some of the positives are again the trades and businesses that are going on in the area. Manufacturing businesses are doing well. And we've got lots of recycling. And there's been an increase in e-commerce in the area as well. Some of the negative is it lacks basic facilities. There's lots of malnourishment and there's poor air quality. Some of the positive is though education is hope. So the positive would be that if people get more educated, they're more likely to go off and start businesses and get better jobs and therefore be able to move out the slums. So finally, the possible questions for figure 3. 3 possible types of questions. They're all going to be kind of 6 to 9 markers. So we've got this statement, slums of hope or slums of despair. Evaluate, discuss this statement. And again, if you're building up like a 6 or a 9 marker, you need to provide lots of evidence from the pages and you need to look at the positives and the negatives. To what extent should the government take responsibility for the slums? So again, you're positioning it, should they be doing more? What would you suggest the government could do? And what type of things they need to kind of fix. Last question, possible question is justify your position on the positive and negatives of the slums. Very similar type of question to the first one, it's just worded slightly different and you're trying to justify why you believe there are lots of positives in the area, but also if you think there are negatives as well. So you need to actually kind of make a decision with your opinion. So that summarises the pre-release booklet from 2020. Make sure to check out the link in the description to the TES website where I'll be including my mock exam papers and mark schemes to go along with this pre-release booklet. Please subscribe to the channel because I'm going to be producing a lot more GCSE geography content throughout the year.